Thank you, Kathy. Once a teacher, always a teacher. That was a great overview. And so now is the part where we tell you what the process is. Remember when I said that we're about the art of productive conversation, good conversation, conversation that transforms your lives. Well, how do you do that? You have great facts, and Kathy just gave you a wonderful overview. And you also have a good process. The process really matters on how you have good conversation. So speaking of democracy and people who teach democracy, our next speaker is going to tell you about the process for these discussions. And he also represents Mesa Community College, which is one of our partners and has been for years in hosting the Future Leaders Town Hall. So I'd like to not only welcome but thank our next speaker, Brian Dille, who is a professor of political science for Mesa Community College. Brian?
Thank you. I'm excited that you're here and for the conversation that we're about to have. I want to talk a little bit about the town hall a little more. Tarek talked about how old it is, how long it's been going, but for you to understand the role that you're playing now, you need to know a little more about the town hall in general. So this has been going for almost 60 years, and at this town hall meeting, policymakers, community leaders, opinion leaders, they all get together in a room and they ask the question, what do we want for our state? And it's one of those few places where they're not all running for re-election, they're not trying to decide who gets what money, and so all of the political considerations, well, not all of them, but a lot of them can be set aside long enough to have a reasonable conversation. And that is what this town hall process is about. It's about deliberating, it's about talking and figuring out what we ought to do. And colleges and universities send students to these town halls. You might have the opportunity to be a participant in the town hall, but these future leader town halls, you can all be a participant in that. And you should know that the answers that you come up with in these conversations you're about to have are reported back to the town hall organization. And as they look for consensus and as they look for agreement on here's what Arizonans said at the Future Leader Town Halls, those are compiled and given to the policymakers who go to the town hall as part of their briefing so that they are informed this is what the people said. So this is an opportunity then for you to have an influence on the policy process, that the discussion you're having now, the conclusions that you reach will be given to those policymakers in some form so you can have that impact. They will take your input seriously, so please take the process you're in seriously. Now, this is deliberation, not debate, and that's one reason I'm such a huge fan of town hall. Far too much political conversations in our community this day is one person on this side yelling at one person on this side, and they both present their version of the facts and they yell at each other for a while, and that's what passes for debate, and it's just not useful. And so deliberation is not about that. So as you're engaged in this process, set your ego aside. This isn't about proving that you're right and the person at the table next to you is wrong. We'll save that for the televised debates later on. This is about finding common ground and deliberating and finding consensus. The goal is to reach a consensus agreement. Quick word on that. Consensus does not mean unanimity. Not everybody has to agree with every detail that has been presented. What consensus means is that nobody disagrees with that statement. So it's sort of a lowest common denominator, common ground. It may not have everything you wanted to have in it, but you don't disagree with what is there. That's what consensus is. And so we're trying to reach that consensus. You're going to be asked a series of questions on this topic. With each question, we're trying to arrive at that point of agreement. So the moderators will introduce the topic and will give you a chance to introduce yourselves to each other so that we can treat each other with respect, which is what the whole point is about. There's also a recorder who is there who will look for the consensus that is being arrived at that table and may reflect that back to the table. Listen to what the recorder says and look for whether they're missing something or whether they put something in that shouldn't be there. And once you've reached a written statement that you can agree with, then move on. One thing that will help the recorder in this process is to have a little bit of theater. Use your body language. Nod like this when someone says something you agree with. Go like this when someone says something you disagree with. Those nonverbal cues will help the recorder know when that consensus is being reached and when maybe you're moving in the wrong direction for consensus. In the conversation, look for recommendations. We all know that education needs more funding. 70% of Arizonans are willing to give education more funding. Let's try to move beyond that. Let's look at actual policy recommendations that the leaders of Arizona should consider moving forward. So don't just talk about problems, talk about solutions. What can policymakers do? What can citizens do? What can you personally do? Those are the kinds of things that should go into these conversations. Now, we will move into our guided deliberative conversations, and so the chair has the floor. This is a formalized conversation, so you can't talk until the chair gives you permission to talk. So you all have name tags, and you can raise a pen or a piece of paper to let the chair know that you have something to say, but you need to wait until you're recognized by the chair to talk. And that way the chair can ensure that everyone has a chance to share, and it doesn't devolve into a cafeteria argument where the loudest, most obnoxious person is the one who wins. What kind of a time frame are we looking at? Yeah, so I can tell them before we turn this off. Is it an hour?
They have on their agendas.
Apologize, I didn't look at the notes before this.
Okay, that's okay. So they get about 15 minutes per question.
Okay, so there are 6 questions. You'll get around 15 minutes for each question. Again, if you reach consensus on a question, feel free to move on to the next one. If more than 15 minutes go on and you're not at agreement, you may have to move to the next one anyways. So with that, let's begin our deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And with that, we will now, for those that are watching via satellite feed, we will now say goodbye to you and good luck with your discussions. Look forward to getting the results. And now we will start the discussions here as well. Thanks, all of you.